Well, following on from that, still questions, I think, being asked this afternoon about the consequences of yesterday's electoral court ruling that former President Jacob Zuma can be a candidate for Parliament for Umkhonto we Sizwe. That ruling handed down after the Electoral Commission had upheld an objection to his candidacy. The Constitution says someone cannot go to Parliament if they've been sentenced to 12 months in prison or more within the last 5 years. Zuma was sentenced to 15 months in prison 3 years ago. Professor Sethulego Matebesi is the head of the Department of Sociology at the University of the Free State. Professor, good afternoon to you. It's been fascinating to watch the impact Zuma has had on these elections. Really, almost out of nowhere, he's suddenly the focus of attention. How is he able to dominate our elections so quickly?
Hi, good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to your viewers. I cannot fail not to start with that slip that you played about a tankless individual, and that is now Zuma. But what I can say, it seems as if our former president did not only rebound, but he mutated himself. Because I strongly believe that many have already written his political obituary. And here we are today. In fact, he is using unconventional means through our democratic institutions, some institutions that he has been blamed in the past for having weakened them. Today, using our courts to challenge, certain decisions against him. And Stephen, one of the major implications of this judgment, I will not be surprised if the MK election machinery will not craft effective strategies to try and leverage what I will call a huge favor that the courts have made in terms of this judgment for the election campaign of MK. So this narrative will dominate the election. The Zuma factor will dominate the narrative of this forthcoming elections in South Africa.
What is it? I mean, if you go back from 2005 onwards, really, Zuma has been the politician that people have surely spoken about the most. If he hasn't been the dominant politician in the ANC, he's been the dominant sort of person we've been talking about. I mean, it's quite a rare political power. I mean, he's been very successful in that way, and it works for him.
And quite surprisingly, we're talking about a South African political landscape with more than 300 registered political parties. Now, does this also not give us an indication, perhaps, of the kind of political leaders that we have, that South Africans do not have alternative leaders, perhaps, to entrust them with leading them? Because here you've got somebody that has been written off coming up again. And if you look at what the ruling party is doing, they are actually lending credence. They are playing into the hands of those who are supporting the former president, Jacob Zuma, because now suddenly we hear about all the internal dynamics, decisions that have been taken that should only be privy to senior members of the African National Congress, how certain decisions have been taken. I don't think it's good for the ruling party, for people now suddenly to come out and say the kind of things that they say. But I strongly believe this is playing into the hands of the former president, Jacob Zuma. And Stephen, I also have to acknowledge, I was one of those who said, but is it not time for the former president to take a decision to say, but I've run my race, let me give over to others? Because I strongly believe that, and question whether he still has any political role to play. And I strongly believe that going forward, whatever the decision MK is going to take, they just want to disrupt the status quo. And so this far, for the past 6 months, they have succeeded in doing that.
It's interesting that, so the Electoral Commission released a very short statement last night. They basically say they're asking the Electoral Court for the reasons. I think they have every right to do that. The Electoral Court has their back against the wall in a way, and it's not their fault because of the election timetable. They were forced to hand down the order without the reasons, so we shouldn't blame them for that situation. But the Electoral Commission saying, really, we want to see the reasons and we're looking at legal advice. All the other political parties have been really silent. I mean, how does the ANC counter Zuma? And isn't that the interesting sort of problem? Zuma led the ANC for a long time, over 10 years, almost exactly 10 years to the day, actually. And here we are now, him turning on his former party, and his former party battling to respond.
Yeah, I strongly believe that the ANC will be very cautious not to jump to any conclusions and make public pronouncements, and 2-3 days later they will have to backpedal. I strongly believe that the ANC also has interest in whatever reasons the court will provide to the IEC before perhaps the ANC will make any public announcements around this. But it's not only about the ANC. Parties like MK will hurt other opposition parties, particularly if you look in KwaZulu-Natal and in certain and a province like Gauteng. And a party like IFP, perhaps even if they haven't yet came out in public, I strongly believe that they are also worried about yesterday's judgment. But for the ANC, they had to tread carefully because already I think they find themselves at a back foot with the previous judgment that was ended down here in Bloemfontein.
Professor Matebesi, I mean, it's interesting because normally in an election there's a sort of trend that we've seen, which is that a new party or a couple of new parties come onto the scene and everyone talks about them for a while. There are various predictions, they're going to get this or they're going to get that percentage. And then as the election gets closer, we start to see that the percentage that everyone expects they'll get starts to come down and goes down and down and down. And also, if you look at opposition parties ahead of an election, we've seen their predicted share of the vote start to come down and the ANC's predicted share of the vote start to go up. Is that going to happen again, or is this election different?
Yeah, well, we should never be in a position to write off the ANC. I've been following all the comments in the mainstream media and also polls that have been run. But with the ANC, and I mean, we had a particular story here in the Free State last week just to say that it seems as if the Free State doesn't have money just to perhaps put up posters. And suddenly, well, they've got the largest posters here in the Free State all over the city. So, And yes, one would have to question the impact of these posters, but we all know they do play a role. So I would be very cautious to say we can never write off the ANC, because remember, you need all your foot soldiers, and we will see how some of these new political parties will crumble even before the elections. Yes, it's fine if they're going to contest in certain regions, in certain provinces, but the hard reality will definitely settle in to say that you need not only financial resources, but you also need foot soldiers who will be able to convince South Africans to vote for you. And that reality will soon kick in a couple of weeks before the elections. But it's really interesting to see, because I've seen the branding of MK, and I would not be surprised that this particular court cases will bolster and embolden the election campaign of MK, and perhaps what is very positive for South Africa, they will move away from this narrative where some of their leaders have been, almost like inciting violence if some of these decisions doesn't go their way. And perhaps in future, if any judgment goes against MK, we can only just hope that they will also embrace such judgment.
Professor Sethulego Matebesi, thank you. At the University of the Free State, the Sociological Department, I really appreciate the time.